sleeping well can worsen memory and increase our risk of dementia pretty readily as well, because sleep is when we put things into long-term storage. We, deal with our emotions of the day when we're in our dream states. There's a lot of really important brain supportive activity that happens while we're sleeping. They have a very important role in helping us feel like calmer, cooler, more collected. And so once we don't have those hormones, it's like one less, layer of soothing on our body. And things like hot flashes and just in general, there's a higher level of stress hormones just functioning in the body post-menopause and during perimenopause, and especially during hot flashes. There are a handful of studies that have been really cool on just simply the act of brewing and making and sipping tea. So one was where they had folks, and I don't even know that it was tea. I think it might have been coffee, who knows, but it was just a warm cup, and I assume it was a colder place, so it probably wasn't 100 degrees out. But they found that people who were holding a warm cup perceived strangers as nicer and were nicer to strangers in these activities that they did versus people who were just holding a cold cup. So there's something about just holding a warm cup and being in that moment. We can't diagnose or prescribe, so we wouldn't be doing that. But we do tend to look at patterns. Oftentimes folks come in with a diagnosis already from a practitioner, so we have that in our mindset of what somebody's concern is. But we'll also look at patterns. We might look at energetics. Are they hot, dry, cold, damp? We might look at specific indications, and that's the fun thing about plants is they each have their own personality, and it's like matchmaking with plants and people, trying to be oh, who's going to be your ally? Trying to find the plants that will really be a lovely partner for that personality, that will not interact negatively with their medications, if they're on any, and support their energetics and support their specific patterns that are going to be helpful. So whether we're looking at patterns energetically or more like anatomy and physiology patterns, I think many herbalists will use that as a lens to try to better understand the people and the plants that might help them.
Welcome to your journey to find true tranquility with the Tranquility Magazine podcast with your host, Jasmine Maya Royce. Today's episode featuring
Noël Groves is the author of Grow Your Own Herbal Remedy and Body into Balance. She is a clinic herbalist and herbal medical teacher and more than 2 decades of experience and a registered professional member of the American Herbalists Guild. She has written a numerous amount of publications, including elements from Herbal Academy, The Herbalin, Taste of Life, Remedies, Herb Quarterly, and Mother Earth News. She has a business that's based in New Hampshire called the Wintergreen Botanical, and her newest book that we're going to talk about today is called Herbal Remedies for Sleep. So welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm very honored to be here.
So I want to always ask, the first question is, what is your current mantra or state of mind?
Well, I would say that I don't have a specific one, but one that comes up pretty frequently in the clinic, and also something that I always strive for myself in my own life is, but it's a challenge, which I recognize, is that idea of putting the oxygen mask on yourself before you can put it on other people. So basically that idea that, many of us are in service-based professions or our lives, we have a lot of clients who have children or grandchildren or spouses, and just that idea that we do need to take care of our own personal health is one of the most important things. And it's not as easy as it seems. So we often have to kind of keep coming back to it and working on it. And that's certainly true in my own life as well.
I love it in a way that I just mentioned the same phrase the other day, because I think it's so relevant for people to take care of themselves before they assist everyone else, because we have a hard time remembering to take care of us first, especially if your mother or other people in your family that you have to take care of. It becomes harder to remind yourself that you come first sometimes. But a beautiful idea to remind everybody that we need to have that healing quality for us first before we can, save anyone else or take care of anyone else. So in your book that you were explicitly talking about your kind of experience, what started you on this journey to talk about herbal remedies for sleep?
So, to be honest, the book itself came out of a suggestion from the publisher who knew I had already done quite a bit of writing on sleep and the importance of sleep and stress management in my other two books, Body into Balance, Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. And I thought it was a great one to do because we were at the time that this started, the whole process of the book started, we were coming out of the pandemic. I know certainly amongst my clients, like stress just seems like it just keeps ratcheting up and things were really pretty heightened at the time. I think they still are for people several years later. And it's also my own personal journey into the topic of herbalism came around insomnia and stress. In college, I had a stressful event or set of events and developed some insomnia and panic attacks. And I was starting to dabble in herbal medicine just as a like, oh, isn't it neat? Let me get a few books and look at it. And the light dawned on me that I could actually maybe try herbs to support me in that journey of sleep and stress reduction. And so those were some of the first herbs I ever took were herbs for that. And they were really helpful. As with everything, herbs are only one piece of the puzzle. So I also had to do deep work in other ways to support my body. And those are my taskmasters. When things get out of balance, I feel very stressed very easily. And my whole family, we have an easy tendency towards anxiety and insomnia. And certainly my sleep can get out of whack whenever anything is not in balance. And so I have personal experience with many aspects of that in the book. And in my clinical practice, we work with lots of clients who are dealing with that. And the herbs are pretty amazing in the ways that they can help. And I also love to dive into other reasons like why aren't we sleeping and how can we support them? So that's a little bit of the background on the book from a couple of different angles of how it came about.
Think it makes sense because I'm also guilty of insomnia that we're going to touch on later. And I think it's a predominant importance. So in your research about sleep, your understanding and what you learned to help and heal, what are the most important things that you learned on the sleeping idea and what is missing for people?
Yeah, there are a couple different aspects, and something that's really important to me personally, as well as in my clinical practice, is trying to sleuth out like the individual person's triggers for why they're not sleeping well, because we do need to address the root cause in order to really get long-term resolution, but everybody's root cause can be a little bit different. And so some of those could be menopausal, perimenopause, postmenopause, hormone fluctuations. That's a big one. I am postmenopausal, and that was certainly something that got, shot through the roof during that transition. And also we have things like blood sugar dysregulation. We have stress as a potential trigger. We have sleep apnea. There are many different things that can be underlying. And so while we can certainly turn to herbal remedies, and they're phenomenal allies on our journey, we also want to get to the sleep. So that's one thing, is try to understand to the best of our ability what the root causes might be and address that in whatever ways we can. And then when it comes to herbs, we typically often will turn to the more sedating, strongly relaxing herbs, and they're great. That's where I started off. Mm-hmm. But what I've really come to appreciate are the class of herbs called the nervines or nervines. And those are the herbs that are usually gently calming and help nourish and support the nervous system and the stress response over time. And they really are the unsung heroes that tend to be really appropriate for a lot of people. You can often take day or night and tend to just really subtly support the body in many ways.
Yeah. So I want you to touch on, because you had already said it to a question that I had about premenopausal and menopause, and what are the adjustments that people that you've learned could help with that situation, and what is the knowledge you gain by it and how to help people with either remedies or understanding?
Yeah, I had been working with clients who had menopause, various stages of menopause, perimenopause, menopause, really just a moment in time, and then postmenopause, sleeping issues for many years before I went through it myself. But one of the things I really recognized when I started to go through it was that it's much like the rug gets pulled out from underneath you when your estrogen and progesterone drop out like that, whether you're in the wobble stages or they're just, abruptly removed. Surgical menopause, I will say, is tends to be even more challenging than natural menopause.
I don't know
And
what
the data reflects that.
Sorry to interrupt. I was listening, but I don't know what surgic menopause is. Can you explain?
It's a menopause that's caused by removal of the ovaries. So it can be from like a complete hysterectomy. It can be because somebody was going through a gender transition. It can be for a lot of different reasons. But most of my clinical experience is more around cisgender folks who are needing, or whether they need it or not, they end up getting a complete hysterectomy for health reasons, and now afterwards are kaboom in this like thermonuclear hormonal transition. And the data does reflect that folks who've gone through surgical menopause have an even more dramatic experience with sleep disruptions as a general rule of thumb versus folks going through natural menopause. But all across the board, oftentimes perimenopause and postmenopause is a huge time for a shakeup, because both progesterone and estrogen play a very important role in helping us feel like calmer, cooler, more collected. And so once we don't have those hormones, it's like one less, layer of soothing on our body, and things like hot flashes and just in general, there's a higher level of stress hormones just functioning in the body post-menopause and during perimenopause, and especially during hot flashes, but even just beyond, like at the baseline. And so all those things can disrupt. But we also, during peri and postmenopause, have a greater likelihood of blood sugar dysregulation because estrogen protects us from some of the insulin resistance. We have a greater likelihood for sleep apnea because we might have gained weight, but also because estrogen helps keep things like tight and toned and pliable and elastic. And so we might start to lose like tendon, ligament, muscle strength. And that can also apply to the muscles around the throat for sleep apnea, and a couple other odds and ends too that all can play in. So in my clinical practice, there are a lot of folks who are dealing with aspects of that. And I also did too. So many of the herbs that we've turned to are helpful, but it does get more challenged because it's things that you might have been able to get away with when you were younger, you might not be able to get away with anymore. It might be that cup of coffee or that second cup of coffee. It might be a glass or two of alcohol at night, which maybe wasn't too big of a deal, but now is a really big deal. Or, various odds and ends that even some of the energizing herbs might have been okay before. And then with that ultra sensitive state, if somebody is in that, might be less okay later on. So it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, it's important to understand different aging factors and different things to come from that, and understanding, yourself and how it regulates for you. But I want to expand on the idea of, in that paradigm and also in other aspects as you age, and memory deficiency that will happen because of sleep. Have you found anything research-wise for causes and reasons for memory depletion in lack of sleep?
Yeah, there's a tremendous body of research around memory and sleep, and it's bidirectional. So it is common, with pretty much every mental state that somebody could be in that's out of balance, whether it's a mood disorder or a cognitive disorder or a memory disorder, you almost always see sleep disruptions as part of that caused by those changes. But then also not sleeping well can worsen memory and increase our risk of dementia pretty readily as well, because sleep is when we put things into long-term storage. We, deal with our emotions of the day when we're in our dream states. There's a lot of really important brain supportive activity that happens while we're sleeping. So if sleep is disjointed, or you're not getting enough deep rest, or you're not getting enough of the REM cycles, if any of these things are out of balance, it can lead to short-term as well as long-term cognitive changes. So there's quite a bit of interplay all over the place. But the positive thing, and the same goes back to the menopause equation, is that as you start to improve one thing, it starts to have a domino effect of positivity. So if you're working on stress, then that can make huge impacts in somebody's sleep, even if it's from menopause or from cognitive issues. And so many of the herbs and many of the lifestyle changes, as you start to integrate them, can have that positive domino effect of like, oh, things get easier and easier. And then once you're sleeping better, things start to improve as well. And so there are a lot of options for healing with that kind of perspective as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand what your body needs overall, because it's hard for people to kind of separate exhaustion, and it ends up with health factors that play out in that way. And I wanted you to talk about one specific thing that's everywhere. And you had a statistic in your book that was 75% of Americans have stress. And some of the takeaways that you found on like dealing with stress and additives beyond herbology and herbs and tenants, you expanded about that. You want to tell the audience kind of what you learned from that and what your experiences on stresses?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So from a non-herbal perspective, a lot of it is the basic stuff that we know, but sometimes have a hard time integrating. But then once you do, you're like, oh yeah, this is pretty awesome. Why was I not doing this? So deep breathing activities, even just really short, and there are many different styles of deep breathing activities. You could spend 30 seconds, a minute, maybe 2 minutes doing them. It doesn't really matter too much of what the specific activity is. I tend to go for the 4-7-8 breath activity that Dr. Andrew Weil promotes and has videos on how to do. But you could just breathe slowly for a little bit with intention of breathing slowly in and breathing slowly out, or maybe a slightly longer out breath than in breath. It does, or maybe they're equal breaths. Maybe you pause and hold your breath. Maybe you don't. All of it has potential benefit, but that conscious breath work of slowing and deepening your breath has an impact on the nervous system and helps put us out of the fight or flight stress mode and into the parasympathetic relaxation mode. So that's like simple, free, doesn't even necessarily need to take a lot of time. If it was in the context of something bigger, like a Qigong class or a Tai Chi class or a yoga class, that's even better because you're moving your body, and physical movement, especially in a mind-body balanced way, also helps us work through those stress hormones and put us into a more relaxed state. But that could also just be a walk on the street, a walk in the woods, some other type of physical activity. But exercise is another real biggie, and it can come in a variety of forms. Even 10 minutes has value, especially if you try to approach it with joy and presence and peace of like, I'm gonna go for this walk and notice which neighborhoods have really beautiful gardens that I can look at, or just listen to the birds while I'm out there, whatever it may be. Those are really simple ways that we can support ourselves. It could be just having a cup of tea, and it might not even matter what's in that cup of tea, but just that simple act of holding a cup or brewing that cup of tea and experiencing it is telling us, I'm taking a moment for myself. This is a moment of self-care. This is a moment of peace. Maybe you do a little meditation with it. Maybe you just sit and enjoy it. It's all good. So those are just a few really simple things that we could integrate one of them into our lives to start off with.
Yeah, I think it's important, especially like in a fast-paced environment like here in LA. It is hard for people to step down and like slow down. And meditation, I've talked about for a long time. Breath work is included in that, but a different version, but they're all, related in a way to take a breath and stop and like just be in that moment. But also you're talking about what I say sometimes is movement meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, exercise. When you stop thinking, you start like being in that moment, and you get like epiphany moments, and the stress kind of reduces itself in a way. And it's a hard thing to kind of vacillate on overthinking, and we're all accountable, and I'm guilty myself. So that's why I explore that idea. And you mentioned my favorite thing, which we're going to discuss, tea, which is, I don't drink coffee. I've never been inclined. Yes, we have to love our tea. I'm having green tea today. But what is your learning factors that you discovered about tea, being an herbalist yourself, about the item of drinking tea and how it helps?
There are a handful of studies that have been really cool on just simply the act of brewing and making and sipping tea. So one was where they had folks, and I don't even know that it was tea. I think it might have been coffee, who knows, but it was just a warm cup. And I assume it was a colder place, so it probably wasn't 100 degrees out. But they found that people who were holding a warm cup perceive strangers as nicer and were nicer to strangers in these activities that they did versus people who were just holding a cold cup. So there's something about just holding a warm cup and being in that moment. There was another study that found that regardless of what people are making, if they felt good about the tea that they were brewing, like, oh, it came from this nice farm or whatever it was, that they got more benefit from the tea. So being connected to your plant is nice. And just those are a few studies on basically drinking tea. But then we have so many great herbs, and especially in this category of relaxing, nervine, and sleep herbs. While there are a few that taste nasty, like valerian and hops, you can make tea with them, but they're not my top
Nettle.
choices. Yeah, nettle's not so bad if you mix it with something that tastes better. But there are some lovely herbs like holy basil and linden and chamomile and lemon balm that can taste quite nice solo or in combo blends, mixing it with something more flavorful, whatever flavor you like. Spearmint's one that I sometimes will use as a flavoring tea for some of the sleep blends, or you could throw something lemony in it or whatever it may be. But there are so many really decent tasting teas that we can make nice, relaxing tea blends with, which is of benefit.
Yeah. I mean, it's important for tea to understand, like, as an herbalist, and also the different factors of tea, because being a person that has insomnia for myself, caffeine makes me have the jitters. And so I mean it by coffee, and I've never had that problem when it comes to tea. And then when I have a certain moment in time where I stop my caffeine intake because I can't sleep. So the difference, which most people don't know, is caffeinated tea, green and black, and then the difference is herbal tea, which don't have that caffeine property. And that's better what you're suggesting for nighttime, that you want to have something that's not caffeinated so that you can lower your stress or your hormones to kind of regulate to prepare yourself for sleeping. And you also talk about bathing as a concept to set up some routine around getting to sleep and finding your sleep balance in that way. I wanted you to talk about a little bit, when you're an herbalist, how do you approach a client? Because it's rare to find an herbalist anywhere, that is accessible. I mean, we do have a plenty in LA, but to approach as a clinician and a carer in the herbalist factor, and I'm a novice herbalist, but when you approach a new client, what are some of the ways that you diagnose or suggest certain things to people?
Well, I will say there are actually quite a few herbalists out there, but sometimes we're hiding. And so if you don't know where to look for us, you might not find us, but we're out there. The American Herbalists Guild has a pretty good list, but even that is really just a small fraction of the amount of herbalists that are out there. I think we have maybe like 2 or 3 AHG herbalists in New Hampshire, but then I believe we have like between 10 and 30 practicing herbalists in New Hampshire, and most of them are pretty fabulous folks. Mm-hmm. So they're out there. But when it comes to, and we as herbalists, we can't diagnose or prescribe, so we wouldn't be doing that. But we do tend to look at patterns. Oftentimes folks come in with a diagnosis already from a practitioner. So we have that in our mindset of what somebody's concern is. But we'll also look at patterns. We might look at energetics. Are they hot, dry, cold, damp? We might look at like specific indications. And that's the fun thing about plants, is they each have their own personality. And it's like matchmaking with plants and people, trying to be like, oh, who's going to be your ally? Oh, when you're not sleeping well, you're really irritated, and every little like fabric or the breeze or your spouse breathing or whatever it might be like is irritating you. Maybe skullcap, because skullcap is such a lovely herb of just like telling the nervous system to just chill out a little bit and not be quite so hypersensitive. Or, we've got this other person who's really easily worked up and gets either very fearful or very frustrated and angry very easily. And we might turn to something like passion flower that helps calm those swirling thoughts and mind chatter, but also quells that excessiveness of anxiety or anger or frustration. Passion flower is really great for that, but it is a little stronger sedative. So if somebody had apnea, maybe it would be too sedating and bother their apnea. So then we could turn to something like lemon balm. That is a great plant for also calming things down, but isn't as likely to be over sedating, and also gladdens and uplifts the heart. And so on and on and on. It's really about trying to figure out the person and like who that individual person is, partly around their sleep, but also their whole being. And then trying to find the plants that will really be a lovely partner for that personality, that will not interact negatively with their medications, if they're on any, and support their energetics and support their specific patterns that are going to be helpful. So whether we're looking at patterns energetically or more like anatomy and physiology patterns, I think many herbalists will use that as a lens to try to better understand the people and the plants that might help them.
Yeah, I think it's important to know their patterns and the things that come up. And also, as well, like herbal remedies in my learning, but you can expand on this, is not a prescribed medication that you take it consistently sometimes. So what is your ideas of regulating remedies in a way that it works? And also you touched on having a prescription drug already and how that kind of will affect you, and also maybe pregnancy as well.
Comes to pharmaceuticals, I'll just kind of address that. Certainly, we want to be very mindful of pharmaceuticals. There are some potential herb drug interactions, especially when it comes to some of the stronger sedating herbs. If somebody's on a medication that has some amount of sedating quality, they might synergistically increase the sedation, which might just mean somebody sleeps better, which that might not be a problem. But if it means they fall asleep at the wheel, or their apnea gets worse, or their blood pressure gets low, or their heart rate slows, that doesn't happen that often, but it's possible. And so you'd want to be really mindful about that interaction. Some that have serotonin boosting activity might interact with, say, St. John's wort, which has a potential serotonin boosting activity. And there are a few others, not so many from this particular sleep category, but there are some herbs that affect liver enzyme pathways. So we're still learning about that, but there's some we know quite significant effect and may either increase or decrease the drug effects in the system and the length of time it's in there, which could have an effect on the drug effect, but also on the drug side effects. So quite a few popular things like berberine and resveratrol can interact with some medications and increase and lengthen the amount of time that they're in the body, which may or may not have a positive effect. So knowing your drugs and knowing your herbs is helpful. And I'd say that's one of the great reasons for seeking out an herbalist who's skilled in that so that you can get guidance. Same thing's true for pregnancy. I think while there are probably plenty of things that you could safely take while pregnant, it's even better if you have an herbalist or naturopath midwife, or a midwife who specializes in herbal medicine, or somebody who has that particular training. I'm very comfortable working with medications as an herbalist. It's one of the areas that I teach and work with. I don't have a specialty with pregnancy and nursing, and so I usually would refer out to a different herbalist for that. So knowing who you're working with and knowing what you can safely do. That said, there is a chart in the book. It does address which ones are more likely to be kid safe, pregnancy safe, nursing safe. So there is some basic information there, but it's not a bad idea to have additional guidance if you're in those special populations.
That's useful to know, to find an actual herbalist rather than going on that journey solo. It's going to result to better your lifestyle. And you do have the other book that you've done, Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies, and including Body into Balance, which I'm sure you probably touch upon some of those elements as well, because it's important not to have that effects with medication and pregnancy. But your book on sleep has a lot of those which are safe.
It is always helpful to have a practitioner who's trained in it along the journey. So in this case, an herbalist or an herbal practitioner can be really helpful, especially if you're in a special population or just being really challenged. That said, I'd say sleep is an area where it's usually pretty safe to do some amount of self-treating, if you will. And, since many people have sleep issues and a lot of times they're not life-threatening or anything like that. So there are many herbs that you could safely explore as long as you're well educated and have done your research on the plant. And I would always recommend, if you're starting out with a new plant, start with a low dose, do your research, make sure that it seems appropriate for you. If you are in a more sensitive population, it might be even more reason to seek a practitioner. But if you have decided to start working with a new plant, start with a low dose, see how you do. It might be just a few drops of the tincture. Make sure it agrees with you. Make sure you're not allergic to it. Just but it's also about meeting the plant with a little gentle introduction, like shaking hands, having that quick chit chat, like, are we a good match or not? Oh, I like the way that you resonate with my body. Okay, now we're going to slowly start increasing to the low range, which for, let's say, a tincture, which is an alcohol extract, most people will take between 1 and 5 milliliters of a tincture before bedtime of a plant or a formula. But you might just work your way up to 1 dropper full, which is about 1 milliliter, and then maybe play with 2. And then over time, you can just play with and listening to your body and seeing what agrees with you. If that was too sleepy, maybe I want to back it down, or that seems to be helping, but not enough. Maybe increase the dose. There's a high degree of like listening to your body. And even when you work with a practitioner, we want you to be listening to your body and reporting back to us. How is this doing? Because everybody's just a little bit different. And then for duration, there are some herbs like milky oats is a really great herb for nourishing the nervous system and helping with the long-term stress response and anxiety response and all of that. But it's really slow building. It takes a couple months usually for people to really start to notice a difference. So that would be part of a daily tonic, at least for several months, possibly longer. But most of the other plants that we are working with, while they might have great benefits with long-term use, they usually have some amount of immediate action as well within, a couple minutes to a day to a week that you'd start to notice some benefits. And so there's flexibility if you're just needing a little bit of extra support to have a remedy that you maybe take. Oh, I know I'm not going to sleep well today. I'm going through a stressful period. So I'm going to make this tea or take this tincture, or I bought these capsules that I'm going to take and use them just temporarily. And then when you're feeling better, you can see, like, can I maintain without them? And then there may also be somebody who's just in a really rough patch with sleep, and they do best with taking that sleep remedy on an ongoing basis. Most plants are very safe to take either way. It's just good to know that some plants will be more effective over time. And so if it didn't do everything you wanted it to do within one night, it's worth giving it a little bit more time, at least a couple weeks, maybe even a couple months, to pass judgment on how long-term of a benefit you're getting from that.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand the difference in how herbs come out and how they affected, and the milligrams, the dosage, and body regulating. But I especially love something you were talking about, greeting the plants. My father's a horticulturist, so I understand that plants have their own energy source and like communication, but we're lucky that they grow a lot of places, but they're not accessible in all places. And if you're speaking like from your clinic or order online for some of these other outlets, or some outlets to have these accessible remedies, because you talk about the poppy, the California poppy, and as one of your remedies in the book. And I would say I live here in California and it's illegal to pick any of these poppies. I don't even know if you could order them in. But if you had some other outlets that you found that are qualified herbalists that ship, do you have any suggestions if your clinic does that, or anyone that does?
Yes. Well, I don't sell herbs actually at all anymore, but I never sold to the public anyway. But there are really great sources. So on my website, which is wintergreenbotanicals.com, I do have a links page under the Learn More. So you can get a lot of different resources there, including some great herb companies and farms. But I'll list a few that I really like. So when it comes to pre-made products, a few that I really love include Gaia Herbs. They make liquids in capsules that are very potent. Sometimes they're so potent that one pill might be too much, or one pill might be okay, but 2 is too much. So you can always open up the capsule and take lower doses if you want. But they also make good liquid extracts for the limited selection that they have. Another really good company that's herbal, that's pretty available, is Urban Moonshine, and they make liquid tincture alcohol extracts that are in formula. And I think they just make a couple sleep blends, but they make some really nice stress and sleep formulas. And Jovial, who's one of the owners, and I both went to herb school together with Rosemary Gladstar for the advanced program. And so she and I really resonate as far as our training goes. We have a lot of similarities of our teachers. And so I really love the blends that she and Guido have put together. So that's a really great spot. When it comes to getting things directly from farms, some of the herbs I talk about in the book are so much better if they're fresh or freshly dried from an herb farm versus from the big industrial herb market. So things like holy basil or tulsi, lemon balm. Lemon balm loses a lot of potency once it's dry, but it's still nice as a tea. And so getting it from a farm like Oshala Farm in Oregon is a great one. We have Foster Farm Botanicals and quite a few other ones in the Northeast. And so there are many, but those are just two starter ones. When it comes to bulk herbs, I do really love Mountain Rose Herbs, and they make a lot of other products too that are very good. That said, they are coming from the international market. So for those more delicate herbs like holy basil and lemon balm, I prefer them directly from a farm. But for most of the other, for spices and for passion flower and a few other herbs that aren't quite so widely available from the farms, I do really love Mountain Rose Herbs, and their quality control is a bit better than other big markets that are out there. So I appreciate that. And they're generally, all these places are selling organic stuff, and you can always grow them. So that's the other big thing. If you have access to a garden plot or even pots, you can grow quite a few of these plants in the garden. I have a passion flower plant directly to the right of me because I'm in New Hampshire in like warm zone 4. So passion flower does not survive. Passion flower is a southeastern plant, so it wants to be in like Florida. And so it does not really survive the winters here, but I can grow it in a pot. I could grow like lemon balm in a big pot, and I may or may not love it, but I can do it. I can grow holy basil. I just moved last year, and so I don't have gardens in the ground, but I have deck planters. And so I got some self-watering deck planters, and I've got like this one pot that's just brimming with holy basil that I can work with. And the quality is going to be so much better than anything I could get from the market. So as you get to develop a relationship with the plants, you often start to want to grow them if you weren't already a gardener and find some way to connect. Or you might find a local farm that you can go to the farm and go get. California poppy, super easy to grow. I mean, it's something that people throw in their lawns as a lawn flower. And it would be around this time we're recording in late summer, early fall. And that would be about the right time to be digging up the whole plant with the roots and the leaves and tincturing that or making other medicines. But you can buy pre-made products from other companies too that are very good.
Yeah, I appreciate you expanding a little bit about resources that people can utilize for their journey. And then I wanted you to slightly touch on the differentiation of the plant and the spectrums that you talk about in your book a little bit, for people to understand which elements have different purposes.
Yes, it would be a good idea to always get to know the information that's out there on a plant before you start working with it, because some plants have different parts that we might use for different purposes, or it might be a key part that is the part that we work with medicinally. And so getting to know whether or not, for holy basil, it's the above ground parts with the leaves and the flowers. For passion flower, it's the aerial vines in bloom. A lot of the plants that we talk about for sleep do tend to be like above ground parts or flowers. Like when it comes to the chamomile, it's really just that flower head that we tend to work with. If a few like stems and leaves get in there, it's fine. But then there are some, such as valerian, where it's the root, and really the fresh root is going to be best. And so these are all things that you'll learn as you get to research your plants. So in my book, Herbal Remedies for Sleep, I do have very detailed plant profiles that go into what part you use and when you harvest and how you harvest and what dose to use and what formats of remedies work best for each plant. And so I do have some really nice profiles in the book, and whether it's best fresh or dry or fresh or dry are both good. Usually they know if they're a good supplier, any of the ones I just mentioned will know what part of the plant to use.
True. It's just for research for other people that are newly exploring that, it's kind of a differentiation of information that just a little bit to help them start their journey. And then I love the fact that in your book, you can pick it up everywhere now. So the Herbal Remedies for Sleep, you have recipes in there that I love. I especially like your ashwagandha chai. And we're just going to touch on that lightly. And then because ashwagandha is an interesting herb, you want to talk about that a little bit. And then we'll love to explore all of your recipes in your book now available.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, ashwagandha is such a great plant, and a lot of people do really well with it. Not everybody though. So it is one that it's kind of persnickety about who it works well for and not, but has gotten quite trendy for good reasons. It's the root of the plant that we use. It's in the nightshade family, it's the same family as potatoes and tomatoes and peppers and all of that. And it grows predominantly in India, Africa. That's where it's most famous. And it's come into Western usage mainly through its tradition in Ayurveda Ayurveda. And it's really wonderful for nourishing the nervous system, supporting deep, calm energy. And it does have a long history for sleep as well. The name of in Latin is Withania somniferum, and the somniferum or somnifera means sleep inducing. And so clearly this is a plant that's had a long history of support for sleep. And I'm not completely trained in Ayurveda, but I know bits and pieces, and it is a plant that I work with quite a bit in my clinical practice. And traditionally, it's one where they would infuse it into ghee, which is clarified butter, or into milk. And the idea that when you extract it in fat, that it helps drive it to the nervous system, which is lined with fat. So it's one of the really popular ways of working with it, especially if folks are using it to support sleep or calm or the nervous system. It is in a class of herbs that would be called adaptogens. So these are herbs that help the body adapt to stress and usually are helping to improve the stress hormone communication from the brain down to the adrenals. And it can have a bit of a relaxing as well as a stimulating effect. And there are occasionally people who get overstimulated from ashwagandha that might do better with some other herbs that are a little bit more nervine in nature, like the lemon balm or the holy basil, or even more, potent sedatives like the passion flower. And so it's not for everybody, but it is a really great herb for a lot of people. It's also a little bit thyroid boosting, which is often helpful. There are quite a few people, especially peri and postmenopause. Hypothyroid is quite common. And depending upon where somebody's at, ashwagandha might give them a little bit of a boost. And so that can sometimes be nice. But if somebody was already a little hyperthyroid or they were on medications to raise their thyroid, it is possible that ashwagandha might overstimulate their thyroid a little bit. So that would be something you'd want to watch and probably avoid, or at least if I had somebody who, say, was hypothyroid but on medications, I'd want to be listening to their body, making sure that their heart's not racing and they're feeling really hot and agitated. And I'd want them to be getting tested for their TSH and their thyroid hormone levels so we could make sure that they weren't getting pushed too much by the ashwagandha. So if you're a beginner, I would probably just avoid the combo, although sometimes it does have a place there. But that might be a good cause to work with a practitioner.
Amazing. Yeah, informative. But also, just to clarify, you are distinctively identifying plant cultures and their orientation by saying the nervine and the pathogen, and also you mentioned one earlier. I just wanted to distinctify that people would know that it's kind of a different set of herbs in a way department.
So we would often call them herbal actions. And so the three main categories that I tend to focus on in the book, one is adaptogens. So those are the herbs that help our body adapt to stress. They also can tend to be a little bit more stimulating. So ashwagandha is one that most people can also take and find support in the evening to sleep. But a lot of times people might turn to them more as daytime remedies so that they feel more energized and less stressed during the day. But it's a safer stimulation, generally speaking, than caffeine. And so that might be something that by having better energy and less stress during the day, that they sleep better. That works for some people, but not everybody. Some people, even that little bit of stimulation jars their sleep later. So that's an individual thing. The nervines are the herbs that nourish and support the nervous system. They often do have a little bit of calming effect, but they're usually not super duper sedating. So I would put like milky oat seed, lemon balm, holy basil actually fits in several categories. It's a little bit of an adaptogen and a lot of a nervine. And so quite a few really wonderful herbs in that category. And then we have the stronger sedative plants that I would tend to just use those at night for most people, unless you were like really anxious and need to be dropped down to the ground. But, the California poppy and passion flower, valerian, hops, those in my mind tend to be the stronger sedatives. And those would be the ones too that I'd be a little more careful if somebody had apnea or they were on sedative medications, because it might be too sedating. But for most people, they're usually pretty safe plants. Chamomile is kind of in between. It's like a nervine and a sedative. And so there's a lot of variation in there, but we cover all the topics in the book. And I'd say we focus most on the nervines and the relaxant sedative plants.
I just want to make sure we distinctify the difference a little bit, because to help novices and people that are not exploring herbs, just a little bit of the basics, but also your book will cover most of these things if they're looking for helping with their sleeps. What was the best advice you've ever received?
Oh gosh, I have received so much good advice over the years. I would say that one of the best things, which is not a specific like phrase, but just a way of being, is studying with Rosemary Gladstar. She is sometimes called like the fairy godmother of herbalism. She is a delightful, amazing human being. And from studying with her, I just have been really appreciative of how she tries to bring so much positivity into the work she does and the people around, and to be really supportive and all of that. And so that just has been something that's been really meaningful to me, is to try to maintain that very positive and supportive role versus getting too critical. And I can be somebody who can get too critical. So I do really love that from her. And that was a really important lesson for me, to get to see her in action, and just the amazing imprint that she's had on the world, and to be inspired by that, to try to bring more positivity to classes, to students, to people, and just to there's just so much good in the world, and to focus especially on that. And the herbs are helpful allies in that. And then I think you had one more question.
Yes. So what is the best lesson, advice you've ever received from the hardest moments in your experience? I don't like the word failure, but I always advocate that you tried. So what was the best takeaway from a moment like that in your life?
I don't have like a specific thing that I've already thought of in advance. So this might not be the smartest answer, if you will, but I think just, rolling with the punches, basically. So stuff happens and we can choose to dwell on it, or we can just learn from it and move forward. And that's always been something that is important to me. So always appreciating what we have, trying to not have any regrets, and learn from our mistakes and keep moving forward without getting bogged down by them. And that's definitely something that I've lived by. And I've been lucky to have had a very blessed life, but I certainly have had some challenges along the way. And it's been really helpful to have that perspective, to continue to experience life in a joyful way, and also just move on.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you don't dwell in the past too long, because, it's not a helpful entity when you're present in this moment. So thank you very much, Maria Noël Groves, who is the author of this new book, Herbal Remedies for Sleep. She is a clinical herbalist, and you can find her information below in the bio, as well as finding her on Wintergreen Botanicals as well. And she's based in New Hampshire. So if you're looking for anyone on the East Coast, she is your ally in that department, because you also know your zoning for planting as well. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you greatly.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Tranquility Magazine podcast. Please subscribe and add your questions to our Q&A. We want to give a thank you to our team for their effort in creating every episode and our content at tranquilitymagazine.com.